discovered or what information is available to us at this time. So I would just be mindful of that if anyone is looking to ask questions. But I'm just going to hand over to Kenneth just to say a few words of update on the information that we have and where things are. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and good morning, everybody. Really a very brief statement. I think members will be familiar with the announcement from Petro-Ineos, which of course is a 50-50 joint venture between Ineos and PetroChina. The announcement made last week about the creation of a new fuel imports terminal at Grangemouth and the potential implications for the existing refinery business. And of course, this is part of the ongoing transformation taking place at Grangemouth and the move towards a just transition for 2045. Matters are at a very early stage. You'll have seen quite a bit of the press coverage that's flowed from this. What I would say is that myself and other council officers have been in contact directly with Ineos, with Scottish Enterprise, with Scottish and UK governments in relation to the position, and will continue to liaise and work with all relevant partners as the situation develops. So that was really the extent of what I was going to say at this stage. But if there are any questions, happy to try and deal with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Kenneth. If there are questions, as I say, the information may well be limited to what can be responded to. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. Do you think the Freeport bid has been any influence in Sir Jim Ratcliffe's decision?
My personal view of that is no. I think it's the age of the refinery and the state of the international markets in relation to refined oil, which were the prime drivers in terms of that. So I don't think it relates to the Freeport, no.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Kenneth, when are we likely to know the true impact on the job situation? There's obviously going to be jobs lost, but with the new import terminal being put in place, there's probably going to be new jobs associated with that. So when are we going to know the exact outcome?
I can't give you a precise answer to that, Councillor Nimmo. I mean, there will be new jobs created at the terminal. I think the assumption is that the number of jobs created will be fewer than the number of jobs that might be lost in the refining business. Having said that, in terms of the three businesses at Grangemouth, that's Ineos O&P, Ineos FPS, and Petro-Ineos, about a quarter of the total employment is in Petro-Ineos. The other thing which is not yet clear is the when or indeed if the refinery will close. I mean, at some stage it will close. It's an old refinery, I have no doubt about that. But I think it will depend on the market for oil in the interim, the timing of that. So I think as a council, it's about being ready to work with all partners in terms of any actions that might be required in terms of the loss of employment. And of course, that loss of employment will be balanced by new and additional employment coming around as a result of both new investment by Ineos and other businesses in Grangemouth, but also the growth deal and the Green Freeport.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. I welcome there being a kind of statement made about this. I suppose as elected members, what I'd like to understand is the avenue in which this announcement will take forward. And I know obviously we have these work streams, whether it's the Freeport outline business case that was submitted last week, or the green or the growth deal that's being developed to be submitted. But I would presume there would need to be some adjustment or at least cognizance taken of this announcements last week. So I suppose it's, as a council, how are we integrating into any amendment to these processes? Is it through the GFIB, the Grangemouth Future Industries Board, that we're a partner to, so that as elected members, we can understand how this will be taken forward, basically.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. What I would say is that neither the growth deal nor the Green Freeport outline business case directly relate to the refinery business. So I don't see any significant change in either the final business case for the growth deal, which will go forward early next year, or indeed the final business case for the Green Freeport. And members will be aware that the outline business case has only recently been submitted for that. But clearly it does have an influence in terms of the broader future of Grangemouth. It is very much tied in with the just transition to 2045 and the move away from the carbon intensive industries at Grangemouth. So I think that whilst there isn't an immediate impact in relation to these pieces of work, I just think we need to be very, open-minded, connected into partners and business and governments, both north and south of the border, so that we can, keep a close eye on the situation and ensure that, I think particularly when it comes to the employment position, that we're taking that into account as we move forward on both of these major projects.
Thanks, Camilla. Can I just add, I think that I do understand, and I did ask some questions about this privately yesterday in terms of just what you were saying there, Chief Executive. I think that given that much of our growth deal, etc., is already focused on the just transition and the need for reskilling, etc., that's encouraging. I suppose my question is more that if there are adjustments to the acceleration of some of these, skills needed, adjustment to skills or the announcement of the change of becoming an import facility, that we would be fleet of foot and also because so much of our growth deal is underpinned by external investment and investor confidence, therefore is hugely important. And sometimes that doesn't always follow the most logical path. So I suppose it's knowing that having this announcement being made, things could accelerate quickly if, for example, lots of employees decided to simultaneously look for different jobs, and that would have an impact on many aspects. So it's just so that we can understand how we are responding fleet of foot to that, knowing that many of our plans across the district are really central to that confidence and that work in the growth deal and the investment, etc. So I just want to make sure that there's an opportunity for elected members to understand fully. I'm sure that a briefing will be offered as things move on, but I just think it's really important that we are kept completely up to date with that because it's so crucial. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I understand elected members' concern. What I would say is in terms of the growth deal and the work that we're doing to profile the various projects across the 10 years of funding we have in the growth deal, that the skills transition project is right at the front end of that. So I think it'll be one of the very first projects to get underway once we have the full business case approved. I think we've always seen the link between the transition and the new skills needed for potential employees in these businesses has been vital both to the growth deal and more widely. So that is right at the front end of the programme.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. I'm going to take Councillor Kerr and then I'm going to move into our agenda.
Thanks, Convener. It's probably not a question, but, well, I don't know if you'll be able to answer the question, Kenneth. Obviously, if the production of fuel stops at Grangemouth, the nearest is probably Liverpool. That will, in my view, cause us as a country a problem. But I don't know if you're qualified enough to comment on that, Kenneth.
I'm not sure I'm qualified enough, Councillor Kerr, but let me just say that in terms of fuel security, certainly the absolute intention is that this new import terminal will ensure there is a at least an equal flow of the various petrol, diesel, aviation fuel from Grangemouth as there has been previously. The difference is that it won't be refined on site, but the intention is that the flow of product will be no less than it has been before. That's my understanding.
Thank you very much, Kenneth.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, colleagues, for those questions. If we can move now into our agenda proper, and the item number 3 is the minute of the meeting of the executive held on the 17th of October. Are we happy to agree that as a minute? Okay. Are there any questions in relation to the minute? No. Moving on to item 4, it's the rolling action log, and I'll go to Mr. Moody.
Yes, thank you, Convener. And as usual, the rolling action log records the decisions of the executive where a further report has been called for. Where the report isn't available, there are comments explaining why that is, and the rolling action log appears to be up to date. It is available for members to ask questions.
Yeah, I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. Just a couple of quick questions. The first one's in relation to 612. Can it just be confirmed if the school crossing patrols are actually a statutory requirement? Because if you read the information in the action log, that's what it seems to be saying.
Okay, Mr. Binney.
Thank you. They're a statutory requirement if the levels of traffic flow reach a certain criteria, but it's not a statutory provision to provide school crossing patrollers at every single crossing near a school. So it's a yes and no answer.
So we would need to actually carry out traffic management surveys for each part of the road that we needed, or we thought we needed one, if it's outside a school or whatever.
You may wish to hold that and maybe ask that similar question when we come to the transport planning report,
Okay.
Councillor Nimmo.
I'll do that. My other points just in relation to 639, we're supposed to have an Equalities and Human Rights Officer start yesterday. Can it just be confirmed if they've actually started?
Mr. Moody.
Yes, I can confirm we do have our new Equalities and Human Rights Officer. As you observed, Councillor Nimmo, she did just start yesterday, so she's not ready to do the bit of work that's called for in the rolling action log quite yet.
That's fine. Thanks for clarifying that. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, we're happy to agree with the rolling action log. Yep. Okay, I'm going to make a slight alteration to the rest of the agenda, and I'm going to take the Treasury management item first. This is an item that is due to be referred to Council, and we have a lunchtime cut-off for the papers today. So in order to be able to have the report ready to go out to members and not delay the papers, we will take that item next, and I will go to Mrs. Templeton.
Thank you, Convener. The report in front of you today is the standard interim report that looks at Treasury management activity for the first 6 months of the financial year. The report considers the activity that's taken place, and it should be considered in the context of the Treasury management strategy that was considered by Executive in May 2023. In line with the Prudential Code and the Treasury Management Code, the report should be considered by Executive, and then, as the leaders referred to, the report would then be referred to Council for consideration. So if agreed, Council will consider this report next week. Page 138 of the report includes the standard section on the economic and interest rate outlook, and I'm just going to focus on that for a few minutes. At this stage, inflation is expected to end the year under 5%, which is positive. However, the sustained high levels of inflation have already made their impact for the Council and for household budgets, and inflation is not expected to return to 2% until the second quarter of 2025. So that persistent inflation means that interest rates are expected to be higher for longer. The strategy report in May 2023 anticipated an average bank rate for 2023-24 of 4.25%, and an average PWLB 50-year rate of 4.3%. And those rates are important because that's effectively the rates that the council will borrow at. But the interim report now highlights at paragraph 5.1.6 on page 139 that the average bank rate is expected to be 5.25% for 23-24, and the average PWLB 50-year rate is expected to be 5.2%. And in addition to that, the interest rates for future years are now anticipated to be higher for longer than we had thought back in May, and indeed at the time that the capital programme was approved on the 1st of March this year. What that means is it will cost us more to borrow this year and in the coming years, and that puts additional pressure either on the revenue account through our borrowing charges or on the investment side through potential reductions in borrowing. So we are in the process of working our way through the development of the capital programme. And we're looking at all the assumptions and calculations that we need to do to be able to bring that back to Council for approval in February. It's also worth noting that just this morning, the Scottish Government has sent a consultation on potential changes to accounting for the statutory charges for the repayment of debt. And it's just arrived, so I haven't had anything other than a skim through it. But we'll need to look at the potential implications of that, and if it's a change to our loans fund repayment policy, we'll need to report back to members on that. So the UK economy remains fragile. There was little growth in 2023, and indeed the Office for National Statistics have estimated there'll be no growth for the third quarter in 2023. In addition, growth is expected to remain low during 2024, and the Office of Budget Responsibilities reduced its forecasts from March earlier this year, and indeed even those forecasts are more optimistic than those of the Bank of England earlier this month. So the UK economy remains in a very difficult position, and there is a view that the UK must reduce public sector spending. And clearly that will impact on our funding. I previously noted in the September Council meeting that the Scottish Government's medium-term financial strategy that they published in May 2023 had warned that the revenue budget for 24-25 faced a £1 billion funding gap. So we will get an update on that when we get the Scottish Budget announcement on the 19th of December. But I think it remains the case that we have to assume that flat cash from the Scottish Government will be our best outcome. Turning back to the report, the borrowing strategy set out in section 5.2, and our longer term borrowing requirement has increased, but that's part for 23-24, but that's mainly due to acceleration of capital projects. The bulk of the borrowing that we are expecting to do is to support the housing capital programme, and we are continuing to discuss the full range of borrowing options with our Treasury advisors. The investment strategy is set out at section 5.3 of the report, but there's no significant changes that I need to flag up to members, and there's no proposed changes to our counterparties. And those are the kind of significant matters that I would want to draw committee's attention to. Happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Templeman. We seem to have more often our Treasury management reviews coming forward, but I can obviously, just from hearing from Mrs. Templeman, understand why it's critical that members are aware of the challenges that are around right now. Our Treasury management is how we manage our finances, particularly around our capital programme, and it's right that at this stage work is done in order to inform going forward. We've heard that inflation remains stubbornly high, although it has dropped slightly, but the anticipation of the drop that was expected has not happened. As a result, the financial outlook remains very challenging and unstable. going forward. So it's something that we will continually have to make cognizance of, and look at making sure we get the best possible deal for any borrowing that we're required to make. So I'm happy to move this interim review and refer it on to Council. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to thank Mrs Templeman and the officers for their work in controlling these funds. As she said, it's the supporting of housing, which is I would assume that most people would see as something that's pretty important to be doing at a time when there's a housing shortage. And I'd like to thank you for that answer. And there's only one little thing. You say here, whilst inflation has reduced, well, inflation is still moving forward. It doesn't. If to reduce it, we need to go into a negative number. I would guess. So it was what 11% last year. It's still 4.6%. So we're still talking about 15% inflation over the 2 years. It's something that seems to be keeping going, and every time it increases. Plus, also with inflation, you get various forms of inflation. You get construction inflation, and you get various other things. And given what we're having to support, I do understand that the construction inflation is higher than general inflation. So, again, I thank you for a fine line you're walking to keep this and to keep supporting what the council are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. I will now open it up for any questions. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. Amanda, you mentioned that the Scottish Government is looking at a £1 billion deficit. We, as you know, councillors get briefings on various things, and it came to light at a briefing last week that this means the government is forecasting that it will not have sufficient money to fund the spending it currently wishes to make. Resource spending requirements would exceed the Scottish Government's central funding projections by 2%, £1 billion, in 2024-25, rising to 4%, £1.9 billion in 27-28. Is that a projection of doom?
Okay. I hesitate to ask you to respond to that, Amanda, but you're probably best placed.
I think we saw the announcement on Sunday as well, or the discussion that the public sector workforce would have to shrink dramatically to be able to fund these gaps. So I think it's a very concerning time for the public sector, right across the public sector. I think the issue that we have as a council is that we tend to talk about protected services and unprotected services. Protected services is the NHS. Much of local government falls under the unprotected services. So I think that's why it possibly feels that local government have taken the brunt of a lot of the sort of fiscal pain over the last decade or so. The difficulty is that it's hard to see how that's going to change if the NHS, for example, remains protected. And I'm, I don't make a judgment on that, because you can understand that protecting the NHS is also important. So I think it is a really difficult time for public services ahead. I don't think it feels like it's going to get much better.
We still have a shortfall in our budget preparations, say £30 million. And your statement there that is the biggest local employer in the district, that jobs could be in jeopardy, is quite frightening for people out there. Thank you.
Okay, I think it has to be put into context of the fact that the Scottish Government has a fixed budget and has limited ability to have any borrowing powers. In fact, local authorities have more borrowing powers than the Scottish Government has. But Falkirk Council is in no different a financial position to any other council, and facing exactly the same pressures as every other council, and workforce will be an issue going forward. And I don't think that that's something that we can hide from. It has been made as a clear statement in response to the UK government's spending review that if the overall budget doesn't increase, then we will have some very, very difficult decisions to have to make, and none that anybody would wish to make. Is there any other questions in relation to the Treasury Management interim review? Are we happy to agree? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 5 and the review of transport planning. And I think, Michael, you're going to start that off.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report in front of you is to make several recommendations following a review of transport planning to assist the Council becoming more financially sustainable in the coming years. And we just heard the Treasury report. I think it's appropriate we have this paper following this. The report covers a whole series of services we provide across our community, subsidised local bus services, which is primarily provided by commercial operators McGill and others. We explore the taxi card system we provide, the shop mobility provision in Howgate Centre, the dialer journey provision, and also school crossing patrols in the round. Recommendations are presented at 2.1 and would draw attention to the members to section 4.11, which provides background on the challenges the commercial bus operators and ourselves are facing in making the financial, dealing with the financial challenges we're facing for buses. Falkirk Council currently spends £1.182 million per annum to support and subsidise local bus services to ensure our communities are well connected. This is a non-statutory function. We operate in a deregulated commercial environment where most of the buses operate. As I mentioned, there are significant cost pressures across the economy in terms of public transport. There's been withdrawal of commercial bus services, and the public expect these will be replaced by Falkirk Council, but we have a finite resources available, and we have to look very closely and analyse all the services we support and subsidise across the community. There's been withdrawal of tendered services, and that puts significant pressure as we go back out to tender for subsidised provision. And there's been withdrawal of cost boundary funding from West Lothian Council, added additional pressure to our buses in the area. The recommendation on subsidised local bus services is to look at combining the F2 Falkirk Slamane Line Rig and the F29 Falkirk Shield Tog to Avon Bridge. These journeys to be tendered into one service. It's important to highlight that the subsidy we provide for these services is very much on a small leg of that journey, and we're looking at those small legs of those journeys to amalgamate those elements, not the main routes which are commercially operated by McGill's at this point in time. The other area we're looking at exploring, I think it's appropriate to explore all avenues to make sure we have good value for money, is the F1 and the F25, to look at that provision as a demand responsive provision. Now, this is to ensure we provide a level of service to our community, but with the dwindling numbers, we believe that a demand response service would be more effective than it currently is, and you can see details of that at section 5.2 within the report. In terms of the taxi card scheme has been operating for a number of years. It provides a user up to £2 contribution towards their taxi journey, up to 6 opportunities per week, and we've been finding that the users have been declining significantly. There were previously in 2018-19, some time ago now, almost 1,500 users. That has declined to 775 users as of 22-23. Many of the users are using these for journeys for shopping, for hairdressers, for social purposes, and we believe that the small contribution of £2 makes little difference to those journeys in many cases. So we're looking to recommend that due to the decline in uses of the service and the significant administrative costs of providing that service versus the benefit it brings to the community at large, we're looking to remove that subsidy for taxi card provision across the area. In terms of shop mobility, Falkirk Council Shop Mobility Scheme operates from the Howgate Centre. It's operated by the dialer journey operator under contract. The scheme offers a loan of a mobility scooter and electric and manual wheelchairs, which are owned and maintained by the dialer journey. The number of loans have decreased significantly, and in exploration of how we could modify this service, we looked at a provision provided in Stirling, and we believe there's a real opportunity to continue this important service to our communities, but introduce a small annual membership fee and an hourly charge for use and access to the shop mobility provision. Important we retain that one. We also investigated and looked at the dialer journey offer across our community. This provides a service for those people who have mobility difficulties and cannot use conventional means of public transport. We looked at it carefully and decided it was not appropriate to make any changes to the dialer journey service in the Falkirk area. We do believe that if it's agreed today that we remove the taxi card scheme, the provision on that one, we hope that the dialer journey will be greater uptake and that provide better value for money in delivering that service across the area. As mentioned earlier, we also explored and looked at the school crossing patrol provision, and officers decided at this point in time we felt it was inappropriate to make any savings and changes to the provision provided for our school children, and not to take any savings from the school crossing patrol provision, to leave it as it is at this point in time. The recommendations for savings are contained at 5.36. I'm joined by my colleague from Transport Planning, Chris Cox, happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McGuinness. I'll go to Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks to Michael and indeed to Chris. The purpose of the report is to make several recommendations following a detailed review of transport planning to assist the Council to become more financially sustainable in the coming years. Falkirk Council currently spends 1.182 million per annum, which is large in comparison to other similar local authorities providing subsidised local bus services, which is a non-statutory function. Currently facing significant pressures, including withdrawal of commercial bus services, public expectation that we will be replaced by Falkirk Council, withdrawal of tendered services by operators with large cost increases when re-tendered, and withdrawal of cross-boundary funding by West Lothian Council are some of them. The report outlines how some of these services could be changed to maintain services to communities at a lower cost in the future. At the Executive in March 15, 2022, elected members asked officers to explore a role for taxi private hire vehicles in delivering demand responsive transport, DRT. The proposal outlined in section 5.32 of this report would provide an opportunity for taxi private hire operators to provide this service on behalf of Falkirk Council. Discussions have taken place with other local authorities who operate similar schemes to learn best practice, and the trial would be closely monitored and used to develop the DRT, which would be used as a template to roll out similar services in other areas in the future. The pilot areas would cover the towns of Whitecross, Stanburn and Wollaston. The report also considers the shop mobility scheme, which offers a loan of mobility scooters and electrical manual wheelchairs from the Howgate Centre, and how it could be made more sustainable in the future by the introduction of a small nominal charge, £5 per year, in line with other schemes from April 2024. Another officer recommendation is to withdraw the tax card scheme from April 2024. The number of journeys made by taxi cards has decreased by 47% in recent years. Analysis shows that there were 126 unique users from June to August 2023, with just 22 members making up 49% of all journey and 66% making up almost 90% of the users. The small subsidy of £2 has stayed static for decades. The scheme is costing far more to administer than provide financial support, some 60% of the overall funding going towards the booking administration. The report also details the dialer journey scheme, which provides door-to-door transport services for people with mobility difficulties who cannot use conventional public transport, and the provision of school crossing patrols, and recommends that both of these services be retained to support our communities across the Falkirk area. Finally, at the Executive on 15th March 2022, elected members instructed officers to consider a number of issues raised by the Policy Development Panel, review of taxi policies, which are also considered in this report. I would like to thank officers in bringing this report forward with a full EPA attached in Appendix B of the report, and support the recommendations presented here today.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Councillor Deakin.
Thank you very much. I would like to formally second the report. the report does clearly show that we need to make some changes, and with the information that Amanda has provided, these changes do need to be coming forward. So I'll keep it nice and brief and just formally second the report.
Okay, thank you. I'll now open it up for any questions or comments. Councillor Spears.
Can I ask if this will further encourage the 20-minute zones theory that is doing the rounds at the moment? If it's more difficult for people to come into our major shopping centres, and I would include our hospital, because not everybody can get ambulance transport, and if it's more expensive for people to use, then will this put our town centres at jeopardy? I say that because we're in the middle of the Support Local Business in Grangemouth week, and we're trying to get everybody in Grangemouth to support our town centres and our satellite centres, because in today's world, I'm afraid it is a use it or lose it society, and we want to try and get people from all the outlying areas to come into the town centres, because no every village can satisfy the needs of the public that live there.
Okay, Mr McGuinness.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. The steps we are proposing here today is very much to try and do our best to retain as much of the services and support the commercial services and ensuring our communities are well connected. The steps we're proposing here is to amalgamate the services where we believe that there's the value for money in terms of some outlying areas, and we can provide a better service potentially through that. The DRT, we believe, is long overdue in terms of exploring alternative methods of bringing small numbers of people into our town and across our communities. So we believe the recommendations here will not be detrimental, will be potentially enhancement, particularly through DRT, to ensure, as you rightly point out, we bring vibrant 20-minute neighbourhoods to our communities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steinmount.
It's not a question, but we do have an amendment to the report. I'll pass it on to Councillor Patterson.
Okay, do we want to have that circulated? As it's obviously something we've not seen today.
I believe it was circulated earlier in the meeting, but if you want it to be circulated.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Patterson, you understand you're going to move the amendment. What maybe do is move it and maybe hear from the officers, move the second, hear from the officers, and then maybe we can take 5 minutes as a recess, if that's...
Thank you, Convener. Obviously, the contents of the report hugely impact the residents of the Upper Braes, specifically in terms of buses, of course. The Upper Braes already face struggles accessing reliable public transport, and whilst we appreciate the challenges faced by the council, it doesn't make it any easier for our residents to cope with the disappointing changes. The amalgamation of the F2 and F39 service is disappointing, but at least there still would be a service available. Specific concerns have been raised, however, by the residents of Whitecross, Stanburn and Wallace Stone about how the demand responsive service would work in practice, and I'm not sure that this report answers their concerns. Personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable making a decision today without a fuller understanding of how demand responsive transport would work. I believe that we have time to get a report back in February before bus contracts would need to be renewed, at which time we could make a more informed decision. Therefore, I would move the following amendment, that we delete recommendation 2.13 and substitute with the following. Officers will return to future executive with a report detailing a demand responsive service replacing the F1 and F25 services, which would detail fare structure, funding for concessionary fares, consultation with Taxi Forum, and a detailed scope of the demand responsive zone with inequalities impact assessment and a system for the flexible return journeys. I make reference to the flexible return journeys as we have very specific concerns in the eventuality if somebody had a health appointment, they may not know 2 hours in advance of when the return time is. So there's very specific concerns around how it would work in practice that we would like answered before making a formal decision. Thank you.
Thank you. A seconder.
Happy to second, convener.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask just for clarification in the seeing the amendment. My thoughts are that there's a lot of work involved in this, and if there's not going to be agreements taking forward demand responsive transport, it's a lot of work to ask officers and time to give and not actually take it to that fruition. So is the intention maybe to not take forward the demand responsive transport?
Thanks, convener. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate there would be a lot of work involved. However, as I've outlined, there are a lot of specific concerns and the practicalities of this. So I couldn't confidently say at this time how we'll feel about it until we have the information at hand.
Okay. Are there any further questions in relation to the amendment at this time? Councillor Murtagh.
Yeah, similar to yourself, excuse me, convener. I suppose one of my concerns would have been whether we had enough time as it was to develop from now until when they're to come in April, whether there was enough time for officers to actually work up a scheme, even if we agreed today, because there is that kind of lack of detail about what it actually means. So I suppose it's really asking officers before we go away and think about it, what whether they are confident that if item 3 was as it stood, that they had enough time procurement wise to develop a scheme, and what the implications of a delay would be, because I just have very serious concerns as it is that there isn't enough time without seeing the framework that we might be putting in place to actually deliver it. So it's about the time frames, really. What do officers think?
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. From an officer position, we believe that we brought this forward today because we want to progress a pilot. We do believe that we can provide the existing timetables for those particular routes, but they are based upon a demand responsive. The fares will not change, so those who get concession will still continue to have a concession. So there will be no change to the fare structure. There will be no change to the timetable, but it will be demand driven. So in other words, what we're trying to avoid here is a number of buses travelling around the area that are empty. We want to see, so those who go for a hairdresser appointment, they look at the timetable and say, I need to get that bus to get there. I need to get it, and here's a timetable I can use to get back. That's available through this demand response service. So timetable will be as existing, and the provision will be the same cost to the user. So, and we believe we just want to move forward. It's a pilot, so we will come back and report on its progress. If it doesn't work, we'll come back and explain ourselves and what alternatives we can bring back if we think it's not working. But we believe that it's appropriate to move forward with the pilot to test this and to make sure it brings the benefits we think it can bring to our communities, rather than having lots of empty buses driving around our communities.
Okay, Councillor Murtagh.
Sorry, convener. Perhaps I was my use of the word timetable is confusing. I suppose what I'm kind of asking is very specifically, in terms of at the moment what's there is to put this trial demand responsive transport service in from the 1st of April 2024, and I am a huge massive fan of demand responsive transport and have wanted it to be in this council for a long time, so it's not a negative comment on that. It's about knowing procurement procurement procedures and how difficult it can be, and given that we don't really have a scheme in front of us, and I sympathise with the Labour amendment from that point of view, is this actually deliverable in the time frame? Because when I've asked before, for example, when we've had a bus withdrawn or something's happened, can we not put in a demand responsive taxi service, like, you know, develop that in a very short time frame? I've been told, well, we can't because we have no framework for that and there's no precedent for that and we can't do that. And that was with a sort of similar kind of notice. So I understand that what we're being asked to agree here is the development of a trial service, but are officers confident that that's actually possible within the time frame that we have now, and that the details are there to be able to do that, is what my question is.
Okay, Michael.
Could I defer that to Chris?
Right, thank you, Chris.
Thanks, convener. I think, yes, we are confident. We've done quite a bit of work speaking to Stirling Council in particular, in terms of demand responsive. We've been able to basically borrow from them their terms and conditions of contract, which have been well developed over the years. So I don't think there's an issue in that respect. It is intended to be a pilot scheme. We certainly know from Stirling, you know, what sort of their best practice has been. So I think the idea is that we feel confident we would be able to get that in from April. We've certainly spoken to existing operators of Dial Journey who have booking systems, you know, in place which can deal with this. So I think, yes, we are confident if members do decide today to go ahead that we can get that in place in time.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Councillor Nimmo and then Councillor Bundy.
Thanks, convener. I really do think this report's been rushed somewhat. As far as the responsive transport service is concerned that's been proposed here, there's a total lack of detail as to how this is going to be managed, and we need that information before we should be taking any decision on this. It's going to affect taxi drivers, it's going to affect everybody that uses public transport. So we need further information before we can take a decision. I think the amendment's the right way forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, convener. Councillor Murtagh was talking about the time that this would take, but I think it's also important to know the resources that would take from officers. And I know it's very hard to put a figure on it, but if you were to do all of this and come back by February, how much officer time would that take? And if financially, how much salary roughly would that equate to?
Michael.
Thank you. I don't have a specific answer to that, but I think it would be substantial. I think the recommendation we put forward today is our preference to move forward rather than delay. If we move forward, as suggested by the motion to come back in February, that delays our ability from a procurement point of view to achieve the 1st of April deadline. So I'd be pretty confident that we would not meet the 1st of April deadline if we had to come back to a report in February for consideration. So the time is of the essence in our view, and to ensure it's a pilot project we're looking to progress, and we need that time from now to move forward to achieve the 1st of April deadline of getting a DRT pilot system in place.
Thank you. And just looking at the amendment, it looks like there's some things that could be answered already. So, for example, the funding of concessionary fares, that could be answered just now, couldn't it?
I think you referred to that already.
As mentioned earlier, there was no changes to the fare structure. So those who receive a concession currently will receive a concession on any DRT system we provide.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to come back, Councillor Patterson?
Please, yeah. I think more specifically when we're discussing the concessions, again, it's just a level of practicality in that. So have taxi drivers been consulted on this? Are they keen? I know that it's often very difficult for residents in outlying areas to even have taxis because of the logistics of getting there. A lot of taxi drivers are reluctant to go out. I think specifically if they're they're working on a concessionary fee as well. Would taxi drivers need to then put in a claim to the council? The practicalities of that, I think, is what I would like answered in terms of taxi drivers, the availability of taxis. I'm also wondering, so when were we to move forward with the decision today, when would we have this level of detail available? Would it be brought back to an executive before it was put into practice on the 1st of April? I think as well, I have concerns because there are so many unknowns, and residents are unsure of what is being offered as well. How would we gauge success with that? I think a lot of people might be reluctant or unsure or unable to access the service. It's obviously something new that people aren't used to in the area. So I just feel like there's still a lot of questions unanswered, and I've not been able to reassure my constituents when they've been asking me because I don't have the answers.
Michael?
Yeah, I think it's what's important here is there's no, as I say, there's no change to the timetable. So those individuals who wish to go on what was the former F1 or the F25, all what they need to do now, the change that needs to take place is they need to inform them the DRT provider, so which we'll go out to contact with, that they wish to get on the bus at 9:10, whatever it may be, in advance to make sure that we don't have empty buses driving around. So from a user point of view, you're right, there will be a change. They have to demand a service. So rather than sticking your hand out, you pick up the phone or you use an app to access the service in the timetable that currently exists. So I think it's important to state also that we need to go out to procurement to procure this service from an operator. We don't anticipate this being necessarily a taxi operator. It could be a minibus operator, because we believe we hope there's many users of the service rather than one or two, and therefore it'll be a minibus rather than a taxi provision, and therefore the ability to look at the concessions, etc., will be taken care of through a minibus operator more simply than potentially through a taxi. Not saying it couldn't be a taxi, but the preference would be, more minibus operators than taxi operators in this service. But that's what the pilot's all about, to determine exactly the scale of usage and any challenges we may face. But we've got a lot of learning from, as Chris pointed out, from the Stirling experience to take forward.
Okay, colleagues, I think we'll maybe take 5-10 minutes just to allow proper consideration and the implications of the amendment, and if we can come back at that point. Sorry, Councillor Grant, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
No, it's okay. I just thought the debate had kind of taken place there, so we didn't need the recess, but there you go.
I think to give it proper consideration, we'll just take a short recess. Okay, thank you, colleagues. If we can come back into session, please. Okay, before I open up for general debate, Councillor Garner, do you want to respond to the amendment?
Just really quickly, I think as the officers have said, this will make it difficult for officers going forward, or make it difficult for the April timeline, and I do think it's just kicking it down the line a wee bit. So happy to stick with the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the vote at the appropriate time, but I'll open it up now for any other contributions. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. With regards to the dialogue journey, the group had Michael and Malcolm and Chris at our group meeting last night, and I thank the threes for coming along, and it really helped alleviate some of the concerns we had. The dialogue journey service, if we're going to take that forward and make it work, we really need to make the communication of that essential, and make people aware how easy it is to use the service, and what can't happen. And I said this last night, with the service in the areas where this pilot is going to be brought forward, it can't disadvantage anybody in the area where we were talking about. And as I said last night, it wouldn't matter if it was Banknote, Denny, anywhere. It can't be worse. It can't be disadvantaged to the people who need the service. And hopefully it won't be. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Do any of the officers want to respond to that at this time, Michael?
Yeah, just to reassure the council, that is our absolute best endeavours to ensure our communities are well connected and supported in terms of their public transport.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steinbach.
Yeah, thanks. It's just a couple of questions on other parts of the report other than demand responsive. Under the amalgamation, will there still be a service link to all the towns and villages currently served by the F2 and the F29?
Yes, that is the intention of the new provision.
And just on the taxi card scheme, how much of the £47,000 is administrative cost, and how much of that is the benefit that goes out?
Chris, do you have that to hand? I've got it here somewhere.
Yeah, it's about £28,000 administration, and about £19,000 of subsidy that's paid out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murtagh.
Sorry, Convener, my mouse is not behaving. I suppose I have almost a question for Mr. Moody. In terms of this report, obviously it's mentioned within the report that much of what's contained is because of what was asked in the taxi PDP of, I think, March or February, potentially in 2022. And we've had some discussion before about the role and action log implications and why it wasn't on, and this was the report that would cover it. So after this report, does that mean that all the actions from the PDP are effectively closed, other than the ones obviously that will go forward for consultation as what's indicated in the report? Is that the matter closed and no further action from those recommendations?
Mr. Moody?
Essentially, yes, there are a long series of recommendations from the PDP relating to taxi policy, so essentially the new shape of the taxi fleet. And as Councillor Murtagh properly observes, they will go out for further consultation, along with the proposal in relation to the licensing fee to incentivise the use of wheelchair accessible vehicles and low emission vehicles as well. There will then be a subsequent report following that consultation, which will bring forward the proposals. And those are really, I think, the core of the PDP proposals back to this executive for further consideration. But the very specific decision of the executive, which was to call for a report on a series of issues prior to that happening. As far as I can see from that decision, those have all now been addressed within this report.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, Colin, just from the point of view that I don't think that what was asked for in that series of things is adequately covered by this report. I don't think this report is really an appropriate way to have addressed it either. There's obviously been the significant delay for the first point, which is then, for a series of reasons, put these issues, which were to do with a taxi PDP, in with wider transport issues. That's now meant that it's had this significant delay. But what it's also meant is that there's a significant dilution in what the reason why it was asked for and how it's been put into the report. We heard from just in the previous period there before we went to recess, that we don't even know whether what's proposed under demand responsive transport would be incorporating taxi provision or whatever. So it's confused a whole bunch of issues, put them together in a way that I don't think was asked for or is really acceptable. And I'm not, having been the convener of the PDP, I want to make that point that I think, for example, the asks which were made around EV charging, about consideration of the potential for different tariffs, that's been completely lost. There's a one-line comment in this report, and there's been really, as I can see, no detailed consideration of that whatsoever. So from the PDP convener point of view, as the recommendations were at that time putting it forward, I don't feel that it has been adequately covered or adequately given the sort of time and detail that it deserved. And I'm not very pleased about that, as you can tell. But I don't think it was a good way the council to have conducted that business, and I think it was, in my mind, quite disrespectful for the recommendations in the PDP and the decision that was made, that we're now in this situation now, bringing this paper with all these other matters together. So I just want to make that point on that particular issue. I have some questions, I suppose, about, and we've talked in the recess about the demand responsive transport issue. There's also the potential for, there's a recommendation about removing the taxi card, and as Councillor Steenbank was mentioning, there's that significant detail about the running costs, the administrative costs of taxi card. But there is, albeit a small subsidy, that those who are accessing that service, obviously from a disability point of view, they do receive that, and it's difficult, therefore, in taking that away, whether there isn't another way of still being able to provide that subsidy, given that we're developing, or potentially there'll be booking apps for different things. Is there no other consideration that's been given to how we could continue to maintain a level of subsidy or a level of funding for those accessing that service?
I'll go to Mr. McGuinness.
Yeah, as mentioned previously, we believe that the dialer journey can provide a provision for a number of those users, particularly those eligible to replace the taxi card scheme. However, we have looked at this quite closely in detail and examined all the different users and the number of users and the impact it will have on them, and we believe this is a fair and proportionate change to that provision.
So there's been no consideration of potentially how that could be, provided in a different way, is what I'm asking.
Mr. Benny, do you want to maybe respond to that in more detail?
Thank you, Convener. I think, as the purpose of the report makes clear, the council currently faces a £63 million budget gap, and the ambition or target that I set officers to look at was to review the provision that we had and try and find a way to support residents but also make efficiencies. So it's the view of officers that the provision of the dialer journey service will support residents continuing and allow us to make an efficiency from ending the taxi card scheme. So no, there wasn't thought given to working out how to maintain some form of subsidy to some users. And as we've seen, there's 22 users who use 50% of the journeys, but we have a dialer journey service that I believe, or we as officers consider, will be suitable moving forward. But ultimately, elected members can make their decision on whether they believe that's appropriate or not.
Can I ask, convener, whether there's been a comparison between what it costs users to use dialer journey versus the taxi, if they were using a taxi under taxi card for a short journey? Because I think it's one thing to say we're removing a £2 subsidy. It's another thing to say use a different service, which then is going to have a particular cost, and then say, well, that's just a suitable alternative. Has there been a cost comparison between those two for the service users?
Mr. McGuinness?
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember here is that we're removing the £2 subsidy. People can still access the taxis still operate. So it's important when we were doing our analysis to ensure the service was still available. But the £2 subsidy we felt was it was costing us more it was just not value for money. It was costing us much more to administer than to provide the service. The service still exists, but there will be a reduction in the subsidy of that £2, and those who are eligible can access the dialer journey service.
Okay, sorry, Camilla, I know that it's a difficult thing with the lag being online. I suppose from the point of view, when I thought about the demand responsive transport as well, and there's potential for example, if it was being looked at from a taxi booking type service and contracts that were going to have to be made for reimbursement to taxis, I felt potentially there could be opportunities there for having some other reimbursement scheme within that, and something like taxi card could be consumed within that. And I know that we're not at that stage, and it's a different type of scheme that's being looked at, but I suppose we have to consider very carefully, yes, it might be a small cost to members of the users, but that can have a huge impact on a particular community who are more likely to be living in poverty, are subject to some other very difficult financial decisions from UK government and all sorts of sources. We have to think about the cumulative impact of even these small things. So it's just that I would have wanted some more consideration of not just removing it to make a saving for the council, which I understand, but in thinking about how there were new opportunities to be able to provide that support. But my questions have been answered on that. So I'll give notice of a potential further amendment, and I'll let others come in. Thank you, convener.
I think on that, I think the pilot may well draw out the level of usage and therefore may give rise to further down the line a potential subsidy if indeed we get there. But I think until we actually have the pilot, know the numbers, the usage and how that is going to operate, it'd be very difficult to make a commitment at this stage. And that's why it's vital that we move that forward. Councillor Patterson, you've been in a couple of times, so if you can maybe ask a question.
Thank you, convener. Appreciate it. I think I just wanted to add further to what's already been discussed is that we don't disagree with demand responsive transport in principle, but given that the initial report was asked for in March 22, I don't think that it's unreasonable to expect more level of detail than what's asked for in the amendment. And if that means that the implementation, we're not talking about years, but if it's pushed back by a matter of weeks, then I think that is worth it to offer assurances to elected members as well as the residents who are going to be affected by the changes. So I think then the question would be is, where this amendment taken up, it's not going to be years that we're talking about that would push back an implementation. Is it weeks, months, years, I think is the question.
I think the issue would then be going into that procurement process, and that would be the delay, and as my understanding. But I'll go to Michael, and then I think I'm going to wind this up and go to the vote.
I would anticipate being months delays.
Okay, we will now move to the
Can I just ask directly, because I did raise it in my points, has there been any consideration of what was asked for in the PDP paper about taxi operators having different levels of charging, as if you were a taxi driver, then you for EV charging? That was asked for within the report of the PDP.
Mr. McGuinness.
Yes, thank you. That was considered, and the EV charging paper earlier this year addressed the rates we would be applying, and we didn't feel it appropriate to provide subsidies to taxi operators in that consideration.
Convener, can I just? I'm not intending to contradict the officer, but it wasn't. I believe that it was not considered within that paper whether taxi drivers or any others should be given a subsidy or a different charging rate. I don't believe that the principle of different residents having access to different charging rates was considered at all. And this is why I make the point about that when this paper was asked for from the PDP, it was very specifically, and it looked at, the reason it was looked at was potentially because as a licensing authority setting conditions of what we want our fleet to look like, as in move to more electric vehicles or non-combustion engines, then we were saying to those taxi drivers who may well be within council properties or in properties that were not able to have home chargers, etc., that we required them to take a particular course of action, and therefore it was appropriate to consider what that implication meant. And that's why we took an awful lot of evidence and time in that PDP to get information from the likes of Dundee City Council and others about how they did it. And that was why it was important. It was considered as a standalone issue. It was the consideration of the EV charging structure, in my opinion, had its flaws in the first place, but it did not consider that particular issue. And that's why the paper was asked for on that basis. So I would still expect in this paper, regardless of what was decided back last year or this year earlier, regardless of that, we would consider this issue, because that is what elected members asked for. And I don't see that in this paper. So I feel that is not a closing off of that particular ask, and I'd have officers actually looked at schemes where in different places, for whatever reason, whether it's a resident scheme or a taxi driver scheme or whatever, that there's different charging for different for example, if they're using the Charge Place Scotland. Has it been looked at and properly considered as was asked for?
Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Mutter is correct in that the paper on EV charging didn't specifically go into the detail regarding the taxi provision. What the paper was clear on and explicit on is that the charging should be consistent for everybody who uses it, and that was what was agreed at committee.
Okay, I think we've had a reasonable debate on this, so we will now move to the vote. Colin?
The motion consists of the recommendations in paragraph 2 of the report, and the motion is moved by Councillor Garner and seconded by Councillor Deacon, against which there is an amendment moved by Councillor Patterson and seconded by Councillor Steenbank, which has been circulated. Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Bundy.
Motion.
Councillor Deacon.
Motion.
Councillor Garner.
The motion.
Councillor Kerr.
A motion.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
The motion.
Councillor Murtagh.
Abstain.
Councillor Nimmo.
Amendment.
Councillor Patterson.
Amendment.
Councillor Spears.
Amendment.
Councillor Steenbank.
Amendment.
Peter, there are 6 votes for the motion. There are 4 votes for the amendment, 1 abstention. The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, colleagues, for that. We'll move on to item 6, which is the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, and it is with Councillor, Mr Kettrick, Councillor Kettrick, I don't think I want to blight you with that, but Mr Kettrick.
Thank you, Convener. The purpose of the report is to update members on progress of the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, including conclusion of the design stage, and advise on the next steps proposed in the delivery of the project. The report also outlines updates on the key issues facing the project in both the short to medium term and highlights the future potential project decisions that will be required. The main recommendations are outlined in section 3, and those of particular note will be to note that the project will continue to progress towards scheme notification stage in spring 2024, and agree that officers should continue to engage with the Scottish Government to establish an appropriate funding model. We've also sought to agree that officers undertake a period of intensive stakeholder engagement to help engage with the Scottish Government and find a solution to the funding issue. And importantly, to agree that a further report will come back to Executive early in 2024 seeking authorisation to either commence scheme notification or to change the scope of the project. I won't go through the background to the project, as I'm sure everyone is familiar with the proposals, and section 4.1 to 4.8 and an appendix A contains information on the scheme scope. Sections 4.9 to 4.23 outline the scheme development and the key issues, and as noted in the report, the Scottish Government have commissioned an independent consultant, Mott MacDonald, to undertake a technical review of the project scope, the costs and the delivery requirements. This report has concluded that Falkirk Council and their suppliers have undertaken extensive analysis when selecting the preferred option, and that sufficient work is currently ongoing to keep the scheme analysis up to date. The report also outlines a number of technical recommendations which will be considered, and these will be taken forward by colleagues. To elicit further progress in relation to the financial model, the Leader of the Council wrote to the Cabinet Secretary, and we are currently requesting clarity on taking forward the findings of the Mott MacDonald and the funding model. A response is expected from the Cabinet Secretary in the very near future once they had the opportunity to consider the findings of the Mott MacDonald report. As outlined at section 5, the project continues to progress across all business case areas, and there continues to be engagement with stakeholders. In terms of the overall funding, the current stage, the outline design is funded and will be complete by January, February, and this has been funded from existing resources from Scottish Government. The next stage, the scheme notification stage, is estimated at £3 to £3.5 million, and this is expected would cost Falkirk Council, subject to be there no change of arrangements with Scottish Government, of approximately £700,000. However, it should be noted that has not been confirmed yet, because that would be the notification stage. In terms of the main project expenditure, this only occurs if A, the scheme is confirmed, B, it is affordable and a sustainable funding model is agreed as part of the detailed business case process, and the Council then agree to proceed on that basis with the award of a construction contract and the professional services that are required to provide the technical expertise to deliver the project. Once the scheme has confirmed, it can sit on the shelf in full or in part until funding is made available. Construction phase and plan shows us tackling fluvial defences first in most of the residential areas, followed by the tidal industrial thereafter, while costs are estimated at between £450 to £672 million, and based on the current 80-20 split, the Council would require to secure locally anywhere between £90 million and £134 million. This again has not been confirmed and would be as part of the detailed business case. The cost of borrowing for this is estimated at anywhere between 7.8 million and 11.6 million, should the Council be required to fund that directly from traditional capital sources. However, it would be fair to advise that the agreement with the Scottish Government does not specifically state that the Council will fully fund these. This may be secured locally through alternative means. Whilst the intention is that the scheme will continue to progress to notification stage in spring 2024, prior to then we need to secure progress on the funding model and have a commitment from Scottish Government to secure this. and more importantly, identify mechanisms for the Council to secure its share of the funding, as it's obviously unaffordable given the estimated costs outlined. This is now critical if the project is to progress as planned. In terms of the wider next stages, section 6.6 outlines the proposed awareness raising, which ensure that the scheme is continued to be recognised as of national significance and seek stakeholder support in progressing the project. Officers will, as would be expected, continue to engage with the Scottish Government, and there is proposals for the Leader of the Council to meet with the Cabinet Secretary to explore all options further in relation to the funding. And while Scottish Government have reiterated their commitment to the scheme, it is essential that we now seek to achieve progress prior to the scheme notification stage. As outlined in the report, a further report will be supplied to Executive or Council in early 2024, depending on the nature of the report, and that will take us to prior to scheme notification and provide a further update on progress, the key issues and any other matters as appropriate. I'm happy to take questions, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I also have Alistair Dawson with me.
Thank you, Mr. Kettrick. Councillor Deacon.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank the officers for this report. The Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme is the largest flood defence project in Scotland and one of the biggest in the so-called United Kingdom, protecting communities in Grangemouth all the way to the ward I represent, and total 6 wards will benefit from the scheme. The scheme was identified as a high priority given the potential huge costs in an extreme flood event were to occur. Wales, other parts of Scotland have been significantly affected by flooding over the years. Grangemouth has unfortunately avoided significant flooding. With the project potentially protecting 2,650 residential properties, 5,800 residents, 330 non-residential properties, and over 6 kilometres of road, the sheer size of the project is significantly important to keep moving forward. Bear with me one moment. I do apologise. As stated in the report, the funding proposal changed in 2021 when council leaders ordered a pause on all non-legal committed expenditures. Then in May 23, council agreed that the Grangemouth scheme should be considered separately and would no longer be part of Cycle 1. Since then, both the council officers and the council leader have written to the Scottish Government and relevant ministers hoping to have a meeting before today's meeting. The aim was to make sure there was an agreement on how we can move forward with a suitable funding model, something that we will continue to push. With this, I formally move our recommendations in 2.1 and further enforce that the Council and leadership are actively working on communication with the Scottish Government on the funding model. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deacon. I'm happy to second it. I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that has been taking place by officers over the piece on the Grangemouth Flood Defence project, pulling together the scheme designs, etc., and indeed the updating, including the engagement over the technical review, because there's a huge amount of work being done. We had hoped that we would have had a date and a response from the Cabinet Secretary. That has been followed up, and we hope to have that very soon. We had hoped it would have been had that today to be able to share with members, but as soon as we have an update on that, we will advise. It's important that we do have engagement with Scottish Government due to the size and the magnitude of the scheme, and indeed the costs associated with it, and the wide-ranging benefits, not just to the Falkirk area, but to the national economy, not just of Scotland, but of the whole of the UK. And as a result, we will need to take into account engagement of all governments on this going forward. We have a duty to protect particularly the residential properties, and the scheme around that will probably have to take some level of priority at some point. And as has been indicated, the once in 200-year event is well overdue, and that will bring an element of nervousness. Therefore, it's important that we do seek to get a resolution. So I'm happy to second the report. and in due course there will be a further report come back to members about the scheme notification. However, if in the interim we have any further information, then there may well be an interim report that's taken to the executive to update members. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. I welcome the report, but I will welcome the further report even more because, as you know, we have been reporting for some 4 or 5 years now. In Grangemouth, this is the big issue. And over the last few months with the growth deal, the Freeport, Petro-Ineos revelation, that they pale into insignificance if our town's flooded. Doesn't it just affect Grangemouth, it affects everywhere from Blackness to South Alloa. I think we're all aware of the rise in the high tides of the Forth Estuary and the rise in the water table and the problems this will cause. Now, it's adequately called flood protection and not flood prevention because it highlights its need to be put in place to protect people. That's why it's a protection scheme. It's not flood defence. We can't prevent flooding. We know it's coming, but we need to protect the people that's here. The Scottish Government are aware of the problem, and if you look at page 58 or 4.5, and I'll read it for the benefit of many people that watch. The Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme was identified as the top-ranked #1 priority flood protection scheme in Scotland in 2015. It remains the largest and most significant flood risk in terms of potential negative impact. Now, in 2015, I think we were something like 7 centimetres lower in the Forth. So as it continues to rise, the problem only gets exacerbated. And I know we've done some very small patch-up work. You know, it's like the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, trying to prevent his town being flooded. And we have repeatedly asked the Scottish Government that we as a council need to know. Our people need to know. They need to know how to insure their homes, for instance. And I'll leave on this last saying, time and tide waits for no man. And the longer we do not go ahead with this, then the worse it will be. Thank you.
Then Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. Apologies. Yeah, thanks officers as well for the update in regards to the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme with the outline design coming to conclusion. I think additionally also to thank officers for the opportunity members took up to visit on site in several areas that infrastructure will be built up, which has really showed that it's of utmost priority in defending the interests of the people of Falkirk District. I think the scheme is to build national infrastructure, also the utmost priority. Up to this point has outlined our key questions that still need to be answered regarding ongoing finance that's been poorly defined by the national government so far. I think with the scheme notification schedule just around the corner, I think it's vital importance that the Cabinet Secretary is in contact far more regularly with the team once we have the design outline. I've got a couple of questions. When do we next expect the update from the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Net Zero and Just Transition?
Paul or Alistair, whoever's.
Thank you, Convener. As the leader of the council had advised, we did expect this any time, so it is outstanding. We're expecting it, and we're chasing that up.
Right, thank you. And I think under current budgets, understanding that we have the January report coming forward after the conclusion of the current stage of work, are we satisfied under current budgets that we could progress the scheme notification without further clarification of finance?
The current budget provision takes us to the scheme notification point. We need to have clarity in terms of the future funding for next year. It is identified within our current capital programme to take it forward, but we need to be clear as to what those costs are. We have estimates, but we do need that commitment for the project to progress, to take it forward through the notification period, and particularly if there was to be a public local inquiry, those costs being met by the Scottish Government, as would traditionally be the case in those circumstances, but we would need that confirmed.
Thank you. No further questions, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. We don't have an amendment to this paper. This project needs to go ahead. There's no ifs, buts or maybes. It needs to go ahead. And the Scottish Government do seem to be dragging their feet in respect to the funding situation. I hear what's been said. There's a letter on its way. But do we actually know whether this is going to detail the funding that's going to be made available? Or is this going to happen further down the line even more? I would hate to think that this project is going to drag on as long as the Avon Gorge, because that's all about funding as well. But we need a commitment from government regarding the funding. We don't seem to have a fallback position for this project. What's been said already is that we're not expecting the full funding. The council can't afford its current share. And we still don't know what the revised funding agreement is going to be and what's going to be entailed in it. So we need clarification as soon as possible. I'm hoping it's in this letter that's coming from the Cabinet Secretary, but we'll just need to wait and see, obviously. I'll leave it at that at the moment, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nimmo. I think ultimately we are wanting to be able to have a dialogue with Scottish Government around the funding. And I think it's important that we do that so that we can have a realistic proposal to be able to bring back to members and to the public, and that would be our intention. Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener. As members will be aware, we did propose to put forward an amendment, but after listening to officers, we have decided to withdraw that and we'll reconsider when the report comes back in January. But I think it's important to note the motivation for the amendment, and that is because the maths, the numbers do not add up in terms of affordability. When this scheme was originally proposed, the total budget was estimated to be around £110 million. If we are contributing 20%, that's £22 million. It's now projected to potentially be as high as £670 million. And if that worst case scenario came about, we would be paying £134 million as a council. That's what we'd be responsible for. So our proportion with the worst case scenario of the new figures is higher than the original total budget. We cannot just continue to go ahead without having finances in place. I support the scheme, the Falkirk Conservatives support the scheme. It is not only critical for local people and local businesses, it is critical for the national economy, energy security, the supply chains of so many businesses, and not just in Scotland, but across the United Kingdom. And so far, we've heard about conversations with the Scottish Government, and I know flooding is devolved the flood protection schemes. But, and I'm going to say this, and it might sound weird coming from the Conservative benches, the UK Government should be involved in this. This is a UK-wide national infrastructure project, and I'd like the Council to also write to the Secretary of State for Scotland and DEFRA about their involvement in this scheme. And it would be good if the UK Government, Scottish Government and Falkirk Council could come up with some funding agreement to fully fund this scheme. And I do think it should be the UK and Scottish Governments fully funding this together so that the national security, national defence and national prosperity is prioritised, and we as a council look out for our local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bundy. You are correct that so far the pushback has been that it's been devolved, but I have no difficulty, as we did with the growth deal, making representation to the UK Government, recognising this as a piece of national infrastructure and does indeed have the impact across the economy. But we would be looking to try and make some traction on that because it's not been great so far, but happy to do that. Councillor Kerr.
Just a quick question, Convener. With the Grangemouth flood protection, does it include earth?
Alistair, you want to give the boundary?
Thanks, Convener. The scheme is identified through the National Flood Risk Management Strategies. There are other actions within that strategy for earth, Bowness and other areas in Falkirk District. So that the Grangemouth scheme, as it's defined, is bounded by the Cannon to the north and the Avon to the south.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alistair. And the reports, £3 million on reports, £1 million would have done the flood full protection for earth. And I know we only go to the parameters that Alistair's mentioned, but we've got to think about these outlying areas as well. But thank you very much.
Okay, there is provision for the other areas, and there is schemes currently under development and being costed for other areas of flooding out with the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, so that will be dealt with separately. Councillor Murtagh.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Convener. I think that because this paper is specifically about the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, it's important that we stick to the subject matter on that, and I support the recommendations also. I do just want to mention, however, that having previously asked a question about the kind of other schemes and how funding was provided, I did get a very helpful answer from officers in the interim period between the two executives, but I think it's really important that those issues stand on their own merits, and that we get proper and detailed exploration of how we deal with flooding across the board, and how the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme will then impact on the other schemes, and because we don't do these modelling in isolation. So I think it's important that this progresses in order that we can get a fuller picture of how we are progressing coastal flooding, fluvial flooding, and indeed surface water management issues across the whole district. Because until we get that full picture, we're not going to really be able to get accurate schemes designed and costings, in my opinion. So I'm pleased that this progresses today, and that we very robustly bring back a specific series of reports that looks at that in greater detail and much greater depth at a later date. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. On that, if there are no other questions, I'd be happy to agree the report. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7, which is the corporate risk management update. And it's with Amanda.
Thank you, Convener. The report today presents an update on the corporate risk register and the risk management improvement plan, and gives the executive an opportunity to scrutinise and approve the corporate risk register. Just as a recap, the corporate risk register sets out the main risks that officers have identified that could impact on the delivery of the council plan and the council priorities. To provide some more opportunity for scrutiny, we held a session with members of the executive on the 6th of November, and members were given the opportunity to review the corporate risk register and ask questions. And it was a useful session, and it did result in some refinement to the corporate risk register. So we would intend to run the same session every 6 months before the corporate risk register is considered by executive, and we believe that will help to improve scrutiny and provide clarity on the ratings for each risk. So I'll just draw your attention to a few points in the report. Paragraph 4.2 highlights some of the main improvements that committee have asked for, and we're making these changes, and hopefully members will see improvement in the way risk information is presented in the appendices. The last point in the table links to committee reports, which is an important development area for risk management. The aim is to ensure a consistent and balanced approach to how risk is presented in the committee reports, and that action has been taken forward through the Standing Orders Working Group. Paragraph 4.3 of the paper notes that the West Lothian Council audit review of risk has been concluded and reported to Audit Committee, and the West Lothian auditors gave us a satisfactory assurance. They did, however, note that there has been quite a number of changes to our processes and that a period of stability is required, and we would agree with that. A key change that has been made, however, and in part flowed from the audit, is shown in paragraph 4.4, and that's noting that the Corporate Risk Management Group has been disbanded and that CMT are taking a more direct and robust approach to risk management. So the Corporate Risk Register that's been attached to this report has been reviewed by CMT, and it will be scrutinised by CMT on a quarterly basis as a minimum. So the process changes that have been made today have, I believe, improved the discussion on risk at CMT, and we will give these changes time to bed in before we make any further review. Moving on to the risk register itself, section 5 of the report sets out the main changes since the last report to executive. There have been improvements in the risk rating and assurance levels for social work adult services and community mental health services, including support for young people. And this reflects a range of activities that have been undertaken to mitigate those risks. A new risk for premises compliance has been added to the Corporate Risk Register, and this is rated high risk with limited assurance. However, the Audit Committee did receive an update report on issues associated with that risk earlier this month, and there's significant activity underway to improve the position. Services to asylum seekers have been increased to high due to the additional demands. And again, a report went to the Education, Children and Young People's Executive in November to update members on the challenges in this area. And my colleagues are here from across the services to help answer any questions you may have with specific risks. And finally, work continues on the Risk Management Improvement Plan. This is outlined from paragraph 5.6 of the report. I am of the view that risk discussions are getting better and that risk is very actively discussed and managed across all of the services. Many of the improvements required are around improving the action plans and the presentation of risk and committee reports, and we will continue to work on those areas. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mrs. Templeman. I think we need to understand that risk is everybody in the organisation's responsibility, and to be managed appropriately at appropriate levels wherever you are in the organisation. Elected members' risks are our responsibility as those highest risks which are presented to us. And I think the work that's been ongoing to define those risks particularly and to highlight those two members on a more regular basis is actually really, really important. Also, going into a 6-monthly cycle, we will start to see potential changes in risks, which will go up and down depending on the environment, particularly the financial environment that we work within, and should be there to give members the ability to around decision making and assurance. So I'm pleased that the Corporate Risk Register has been updated, it has been revamped, and a number of measures have been put in place, including the approach to council papers coming forward, so that members are far more aware when they are taking decisions around the risks associated with those. A number of areas that were discussed at the workshop that was held for members, and I think it was helpful to do that so that everybody could understand what the Corporate Risk Register was and what it was designed to do. And the changes that were taken on board, particularly around the definitions, and therefore a better understanding by all elected members is really helpful. I'm not going to say much more than that, other than the ongoing work that CMT have in monitoring and giving us the best possible advice and guidance around those risks as they change, but also keeping us up to date on any emerging and new risks that we need to be mindful of. I'm happy to move the report. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. I was going to speak on the CMT, but you've just finished off nicely on that. So I will formally second and reserve the right to come back in.
Okay, thank you. I'll now open it up. I've got Councillor Steinbank.
Amendment, but just to thank Amanda for the session that was run on the 6th of November. I think it was very helpful. Perhaps could have been well attended, but I definitely think quality over quantity on that session. I'm glad to hear that's had some contribution. I do have a question on the financial sustainability in Appendix 1. It refers to uncertainty about the funding and council tax position. I agree that national government policy on council tax has substantially compounded that concern in my own mind. So my question is, what projection of council tax increase in Falkirk Council will the Scottish Government be utilising in order to fully fund the freeze?
So we have been asked to provide information on some of our assumptions, but obviously our modelling for the September council had 5%, 7% and 9%. So we have gone back to COSLA, who are collating information, to say we have modelled this range of scenarios and this is the 3. So, you know, anything under 5% is going to add to our financial gap. But obviously members took a decision to increase council tax by 7% last year. So it was entirely possible that we would, or it is entirely possible that we go beyond 5%. So that's the information that we've provided, but there's no clarity at this point as to the level of funding that's potentially going to be available for council tax.
Just probably a broader question. Has any information from the Scottish Government since the announcement last month been provided on what the broader full funding means in practice?
Information other than what we've previously discussed. My understanding is that we are likely to hear something in advance of the budget announcement on the 19th of December, and I know there's been a lot of meetings between COSLA and Scottish Government to take this forward, but I haven't had any confirmation of any outcomes from that. So yes, but hopefully we will get that before the 19th of December.
Thank you very much, Amanda. No further questions, convener.
I can just to support Amanda's comment there. COSLA and civil servants are meeting at least weekly, if not twice weekly, around all of the budget processes, including the council tax, and the reducing the ring fencing in particular, those areas, and we do hope to be able to have something that will be released before the budget announcement. Councillor Spears.
Thank you, but I'm still a bit misled. The First Minister for Scotland at his party conference came out and said there'd be 0 council tax increase. Has he costed this as yet? And will, if we go ahead with a council tax increase, cut the amount of funding that's coming for the Scottish Government? I mean, there's been several weeks past since he made that statement, and councils, not just in Falkirk, but throughout Scotland, are trying to work on a budget process, and we don't know any figures. So should we write to the First Minister and ask him what his intention is after this statement?
That's a more a political question than an officer question. The statement that has been made, and it has been made publicly, that the council tax will be fully compensated. If, however, councils choose not to freeze the council tax, there will be no sanctions taken against them. They just wouldn't get the compensatory amount given to them.
Would you say then we should say we were going to raise it by 12% and we might get more for the Scottish Government?
There has been a range of potential projections given through COSLA to the Scottish Government, with examples such as that being given by other councils. Last year, Orkney Council did raise their council tax by 10% and had it in their forward planning to do likewise this year. That has all been fed into the discussions, and we hope to be able to get a response back on a realistic level of council tax going forward, certainly for this year's freeze. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, convener. And I think the previous questions as well, it adds to the uncertainty. I suppose that's from the point of view of the risk register. You know, we're sitting at the current level being high risk, and we'd rather be there with medium. We're never going to eradicate that, but I suppose moving away perhaps from the council tax element, which we don't know. We don't really know the full details of how that's going to be funded. But the wider context of that, of understanding what it meant in the expectation of the Verity House agreement, and that was perhaps temporarily abandoned in that announcement, is the kind of most generous way I can put it. And maybe, you know, it's in obviously local government's interest to hold firm to that agreement and hope that it's rekindled. But in the significant ambiguity then about what government might do in terms of the directed spend and ring fencing, have we got, you know, how are we factoring that? How are we factoring the fact that when we were looking at the principles of Verity House, and that was a moment in time moving forward, that we were therefore going to be looking at no surprises in local government and national by local by default, national by consent type thing. But the council tax announcement in particular completely threw that out of the window. So if we are to kind of go back to that position, how does that uncertainty feed into our risk assessment in that? Is it, you know, I mean, I think that we all felt maybe there was a kind of ultra high risk in that, in terms of actually being able to plan going forward. So I don't know whether Amanda, we had some very helpful discussions. I think the briefing was excellent, but whether she sort of fed that into the uncertainty around particularly areas about directed and ring fence spend.
Amanda, do you want to comment?
Thank you. Yes. I think we talked before at the council meeting in September that we really hadn't built any assumptions in around the Verity House agreement, because we just don't know what it might mean. And also we don't know, even if we got some of the changes that we hope to see around things like relaxation of directed funding, we don't know the timeframes around that. So at this point in time, we are sort of assuming that what's gone in the past will continue, so that we're not assuming that there's funding freed up through a relaxation of directed funding. We are assuming that flat cash settlement. We are starting to, as officers, look at where's the potential. So what would we do differently if the directed funding was relaxed? But at this point in time, we just can't build any of that in, because we just don't know. And I think what we've also been quite clear about when we're coming to members, and we were clear in the financial strategy, is there's huge risk around that area, because things like the teacher numbers, you know, the legislation around that could have a big impact on the future future sort of attempts to balance the budget from the children's services perspective. So I think at the moment that the risk register reflects all of that. I do understand the point you're making about, do we need a sort of very high category in there because of the level of uncertainty. And I think we also, COSLA, have sort of long argued for that annual financial settlement position to be amended so that we could look at setting that longer term budget. I think the best we can do, therefore, is to set out the gap as we see it, making the assumptions that we have and using the best information we have. The best way to tackle the risk is still to try and identify those sustainable recurring savings as early as possible in the process and try and get them baked in, because that will give us a better chance of being able to balance our budget sustainably within the next 5 years.
Thanks, Amanda. Can I just come back? I mean, because that was going to be my kind of second theme in terms of the first thing on the register about leadership, decision making, and governance. And I know it's been referenced to the kind of standing orders review. But I think, to be kind of blunt about it, I mean, we've seen on this agenda today, and we saw in particular in the decision, for example, on home to school transport, quite often, the kind of decisions which are brought to elected members obviously have huge financial implications, and we know this really important, the budget gap in particular, about how we reduce that budget gap. But personally, sitting as an independent, I feel that difficulty in officers understanding, or anybody in the council really understanding, that the level of work that's got to go into developing a proposal and the risk of it not going through, and the impact that will then have on our budget, the deliverability, like that's one of the biggest risks that we have. And I think, as much as I hope that the amendment of standing orders and new processes will help that, I'm not sure that we're sufficiently open enough about that in our discussion to really get to grips with addressing it. Because yet again, we come into committees where, the decisions about whether you delay something or not, and the implication on the financial gap, I don't think that is adequately understood in risk, and I don't think that we are doing enough in the kind of, some of the discussions which we have in recesses about what the implications would be. I know we have briefings, but actually getting to grips with what developing these proposals in recognition that this is a minority administration model, developing the proposals that come forward which are critical to getting our budget gap and delivering our services, I think could be done a lot better. And that's my personal view, but I think we are not yet at that place where, and when best value audit was identifying some of the political difficulties that we have, I think we need to be a wee bit more open and honest and transparent about the difficulties that we have if we're still presenting papers in this way, where anything and huge things like the homeschool transport situation then affect. So I think, from my point of view, more work to do in minimising that risk, and I know that's reflected in the report, but just a bit more transparency about it.
Okay, if there are no further contributions, can we agree the report? Right, thank you. Okay, the next item is item 8, and it's a referral from the Corporate Partnership Forum, and it's with Mr. Moody.
Thank you, Convener. And this report brings to you a new code of conduct for employees, which has been considered with their union colleagues at the Corporate Partnership Forum. And it has been agreed at the forum and recommended there for your approval. The new code, it replaces an older code of conduct for employees and councillors, but it refocuses the code on the duties on officers of the council. And that's because there is a statutory code for councillors, so it's no longer appropriate to have one which focuses on the role of both. It also updates to take account of any developments since it was last drafted, and I think consolidates as well, because it draws together many of the existing policies which apply to officers and links to those within the Code of Conduct itself. So it's a useful source document as well of the duties which rest upon the officers of the council. As well as being to the Partnership Forum, it has been for wider consultation across employees and the services more generally, and where appropriate, the consultation responses have been incorporated within the code itself. I don't see anything in the code which is of particular controversy. I think most of it is commonsensical in what it asks of the officers of the council, but I hope we'll make this clear to all in one single document. I return to the recommendations, which are to ask the executive to approve the code.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Again, this is a code of conduct for officers and employees. Of a similar vein to that of councillors, although there'll be some nuances within that. It has been through a consultation process, an extensive consultation process to get to this point. Therefore, I'm happy to recommend this to the executive for approval. Councillor Garner.
Happy second.
Okay. Is there any questions in relation to the document? No, happy to. Oh, Councillor Murtagh.
Don't worry, Convener, I won't witter on. That would be a terrible imposition on the committee. I think that I just have a question about 5.3 and the requirement to be presentable at all times, including when working from home. I note that Colin used the term common sense approach. Can you just clarify whether there's like a detail behind that, or is that just a purely let's have a common sense attitude to what the term presentable means?
Yes, it's an interesting question, because it is one of the ones which has emerged through consultation responses, that there was some desire among the employee responses for there to be some coverage of the issue of clothing within the code itself. We have given some careful thought as to whether there should be something more prescriptive or detailed But I think it's hard in thinking around all of the circumstances in which council employees will be working, whether that's at home, in an office that's public facing, in an office that isn't public facing, actually out in the community itself, to define exactly what those requirements would be. So that's where the catch-all term of presentable is, and I know common sense may not be the best definition for that, but I think it's just something around reasonableness in the circumstances in which the employee is actually working. And I think this meeting is perhaps an example in that the officers attending here will be wearing broadly different clothing than they might be wearing in the foundry in some cases, or if you take the other example, if they were working at home and attending a Teams meeting from that environment. So that's why the more general word is used rather than a more prescriptive quote.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bundy. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kerr, beg your pardon.
Young James and old James.
I wouldn't dare to comment like that.
On page 110, I'm glad that code of conduct for employees with regards to facility service vehicles, material and equipment. You must not use any such resources or commitments for non-council employment out with working hours. Because it's in the news a bit at the moment, I think that's important that is detailed in the report, convener. Not all employees will maybe know that that isn't appropriate. Just a quick comment. Thank you.
I think it very much depends on the role in which you actually have to work within. Okay, are we therefore happy to agree the report? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 10, and it's a provisional financial outturn, and we have Mr. Kearney with us, who is going to take this report.
Thanks, convener. This report presents the latest revenue projection for the General Fund and HRA, with the last update provided to members back in August. This projection is based on the actual financial performance for the first 6 months of the year, with estimates for the remaining 6 months. The key messages are summarised at section 5.1. Since August, the overall projected service costs have increased by circa 2.6 million, with increases in teaching costs, children's care costs, particularly continuing care and aftercare, and IC spend being the main reasons. All 3 areas are currently subject to review, and progress will be reported in due course. These additional costs have been offset by releasing a 1.1 million provision for energy costs back to the General Fund. The overall net increase in General Fund expenditure of 1.7 million has been offset by increasing the application of service concessions by a corresponding amount. Where the General Fund is operating within its approved budget, just to remind members, the budget is supported by almost 16 million of non-recurring reserves, principally service concessions, to achieve the balanced position. The other paragraphs within section 5.1 provide details of the main budget variations for each service. Other than the main variations that I've highlighted, members should note the position with the local government pay award at section 5.13. As reported in the press yesterday, all unions, I understand, have now accepted the pay award, and it's anticipated that the current budget provision, plus anticipated additional Scottish Government funding, will be sufficient to cover the expected costs. Members will be provided with an update once the effect of the actual pay award has been confirmed and the funding finalised. Section 5.2 provides a summary of the savings approved by members. Overall, 63% of the savings are expected to be achieved. The school transport saving has not been agreed, and deferring the decision on school pools makes it unlikely that this saving will be achieved in the current financial year. Also, the projected increase in teaching costs also makes it unlikely that associated savings will be achieved. All these savings are recurring, and any savings not approved or achieved will also impact on future years' budgets. Section 5.3 provides a summary of the general fund reserves. Other than the general fund, which is projected to remain at just short of 12 million, the other area worth noting is the service concessions, with the increased costs within the general fund, reducing the balance from 65.7 million to 64 million. Section 5.5 summarises the HRA, which is projected to be on budget, although it should be noted that the pay award and increasing interest rates will impact on the HRA budget going forward. The recommendations are noted at Section 2, and I and other colleagues will be happy to answer any questions. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney. I'm happy to move this report. It's a snapshot of where we are. If we think back to the previous projected financial outturn, where we anticipated there was going to be significant underspend, some of those have been dissipated and had to be reused. And therefore, the projected outturn is slightly less favourable than we had originally thought, due to a number of reasons. There obviously still continues to be areas of pressure within the system, those of which we have little control over as it's demand-led. Other areas, it's been decisions that have been taken by members and has resulted in an add to the overspend. We are in the process of the budget planning for next year, and decisions will need to be taken with regard to how we look to utilise the various elements within our budget position, whether that be the savings, service concessions, and fees and charges. And obviously there is still a question mark over the council tax that we have to factor in. What it will do is it will still mean that there'll be going to be difficult decisions in front of members going forward. However, there is still the opportunity to take decisions as early as possible that would be able to give us that financial sustainability going forward. I thank officers for the work that they've done in monitoring the budgets and seeking to bring budgets in on target, and over very, very difficult period of time. One of the downsides of the increase in inflation is when you get less for your money in that respect, because it costs more, and indeed that is where some of the pressures around the housing have come in. So I'm happy to move the outturn, the provisional outturn report as detailed. I hope that it may well still continue to be a bit more favourable than this when we get to the final outturn. However, recognise that there is significant pressures within the system that will continue, and as a result there'll still be continued need for members to take decisions going forward in order to reach financial sustainability. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. My first thing is to go to Mrs. Algie, which is that she get a positive about how housing is, or the HRA is on budget, and now you've got education, and it's. But education is different, and particularly one part of it I want to speak about is the children and families, where it's the residential care, the asylum care, aftercare, continuing care, childcare, and childcare general. These are needs-based, and just sometimes that's what happens in a year with our finances. Hopefully the need will lessen off, and which means then less people will require that sort of support. But yes, it's. I know Karen well. I haven't worked with her, and I know she'll be working to keep things as tight as they can. But I appreciate when things are needed, and particularly when it's a care situation, then that's where sometimes we do happen to have a bit of an overspend on it. We're still under the overall thing, and as the Leader of the Council has put, and we have still got time to go, and before we get to that final outcome that we get to the end of the year, and hopefully we'll get the kind of surprise that we got last year as well. With that, I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you. I'll open up for any questions to officers. No questions. Happy to agree the report. Okay, we get to our final item, which is Grangemouth Golf Course, and it's with Mr. Keswick.
Thanks very much, Convener. The purpose of the report is to update members on progress regarding the asset transfer of Grangemouth Golf Course to Grangemouth Golf Club. The report also seeks approval for a 5-year community benefit lease and the transfer of the existing maintenance equipment. Members are also asked to note the need to acquire 1.29 hectares of land from Transport Scotland to enable the transactions. Members will recollect that the management arrangements for the course have been subject to discussions for some time, with the former Community Leisure Trust entering into an operating licence agreement in 2021. This was renewed by the Council and arrangements are in place now until March 2024. The intention of the club is to take on a 5-year community benefit lease with a view to moving towards a full asset transfer. There are 3 Falkirk Council employees, 2.5 FTE who work at the course, and they have been engaged, and as have the trade unions, in relation to the transfer of undertakings, protection of employment regulations to pay for short. During these discussions, issues raised included security of employment, maintenance of terms and conditions, and pension arrangements, and details of these are outlined in the report. Employees have expressed a preference to remain working for the council rather than to transfer to the club, and whilst there is no legal obligation under the TUPE regulations for an employer, i.e. the council, to implement such an arrangement in order to support the employees concerned, however, should the transfer be agreed, they would be given the opportunity to enter the redeployment pool so that they can seek alternative posts within the council, and there are a number of posts which may be suitable for them. If they remain in their current posts on the 1st of April 2024, they will automatically transfer to the golf club on that day. On the property aspects, on the termination of the current licence to occupy, it's proposed that the club enter into a 5-year community benefit lease, and this is generally at a less than market value in accordance with the disposal of land regulations, and there has been both a quantitative and qualitative assessment in relation to compliance with that. The overall position is that the benefits outweigh the disbenefits of the property lease income that could potentially be accrued. And whilst Grangemouth Golf Club, as I've mentioned, it's a lease agreement, they do wish to move towards full ownership in the future. It should be noted, as mentioned, that as part of the progress of the due diligence for the lease, it was discovered that part of the course, approximately 3.19 acres, as shown in the appendix, was owned by Transport Scotland, who acquired it in 1967 to enable the construction of the M9. And whilst it's been occupied since 1974 at the club, we do have to rectify that anomaly. And this land will be acquired under the council's scheme of delegation using existing funding that's there within the Invest Falkirk area division to support community empowerment. In conclusion, Convener, this report updates executive on the progress in relation to the transfer of Grangemouth Golf Course, sets out the next steps to finalise the transfer, including arrangements for staff and equipment. And I think it highlights again the commitment of the council to be engaging with our community partners and to put in place appropriate arrangements for them to take on responsibility for facilities that they value. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have James with us as well to answer questions as well as possible.
Apologies, I do have James with me to answer questions.
Okay, Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Paul, for running through the report and the works James and Douglas have put in to get to where we are now. An officer did suggest I'd need to ask the head of governance, Mr. Moody, if I should declare an interest, having lost many balls and run up a few cricket scores in the course previously, but I'm assuming that's not the case. I'm extremely pleased to see our support finally coming forward, given the number of years that this matter has been under consideration under Falkirk Community Trust. Having met with Russell and Anne on many occasions at the club, I know how much the club means to them, the committee and the members and all who play this excellent course. As the officer has noted, the intention is to enter into a community benefit lease arrangement and then progress to a longer term community asset transfer. This approach will allow the club to take responsibility for the operation of the club and course, whilst they may take time to develop proposals to full ownership. The community benefit lease proposed and the evaluation that has been undertaken recognises the good work of the club and highlights is that without the proposals, the council would be nearly £200,000 worse off or need to close the course from April. Given the course has been there since 1974, it would be a shame for us not to support the club in their ambitions to take over its running and hopefully secure investment to improve the course. This is a clear demonstration of the council's continued commitment to empower communities to take responsibility for the facilities they have and value, and I would like to wish the club great success in their endeavours as the course enters a new chapter in its history. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Deacon. Councillor Deacon, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm going to officially move it now. Paul has asked me to try and get a few golf puns in. So I'm going to say this is a great idea for the residents to get a hole-in-one, and it's a nice of an idea. So we can all get together and get our niblicks out and get down to that golf course. But I'm just going to keep it nice and quick and keep on the green and just formally second this motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. I also welcome this, and it continues the heritage that was handed down to us from former Grangemouth Town Council when it first opened. It's certainly been a long putt. I believe the discussions have went on for some considerable time. My question is, could you explain to us the lease arrangement and that if this is not a success, how it will be handed back to the council?
Convener, yes, as set out in the report, the lease will be a community benefit lease, where the market value of the rent, which is currently estimated at £30,000 per annum, is discounted to reflect the volunteer commitment, the work that they're taking on, and recognising that without the arrangement being put in place, the council would potentially be exposed to a cost of around £200,000 a year if it chose to retain the course in its current management arrangements. In terms of during that lease period, the hope is that the club will move towards a full ownership model. However, if that is not successful and the lease has to come to an end, and because they can't make a go of it, then our further report would be brought back to elected members highlighting that situation, at which point there would be a decision to be made on the future of the course.
Yeah, so there's no truth in the rumour Donald Trump's trying to buy it.
Okay, Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener. It's just a quick question, because the ultimate aim of this, the Grangemouth Golf Course, is for community asset transfer. But with the SPR coming up and potentially numerous community asset transfers coming from that, is this setting a precedence that there could be a community benefit lease to ease that process?
I think we already have precedent for that in a number of community benefit leases, but Mr. Kirchhoff?
Yes, Convener, we've always been open with communities in terms of full-blown community asset transfer where they take ownership, or community benefit leases which can provide that interim arrangement. The advantages of full-blown community asset transfer is they can access a lot more funding from third parties than they can under a community benefit lease, where there is still considered to be a council interest, which some funders won't support. However, it does mitigate the council from the costs of the asset, and therefore for some groups it is a journey on that road to a full-blown asset transfer.
Thanks, Bill.
Councillor Newell.
Thanks, Convener. I'm actually picking this item up on behalf of Councillor Hannah. It doesn't actually fall within the Grangemouth ward, it comes within the Lower Braes ward. I've got some concerns regarding the current staffing situation. Well, obviously with the demise of the trust, we did take a lot of trust staff back into the council. Why would we not take these 3 members of staff back into the council if at the end of the day they've requested a transfer or alternative employment with the council?
Mr. Kestrick?
Convener, apologies if there's any miscommunication. These are Falkirk Council employees who the costs are fully recharged to the club, but because they are dedicated to the club, the TUPE regulations apply if we transfer that asset. So, you know, as outlined in the report, come the 1st of April 2024, if they continue to be in their current roles at the club, they would be subject to the TUPE regulations.
So are we currently looking for alternative jobs for them within the council now?
I'll let James come in.
Yeah. James?
No, thanks, Convener. Yes, Councillor Nimmo, thanks for your question. Certainly to date, regarding employees, there's been many conversations had with myself, HR, the trade unions and the head of service, Douglas. In the report, it does refer to the employees' desire is to remain with the council. The latest conversation that we've had with employees is that we're highly confident that we will be able to offer posts that is commensurate to the sort of salary and grade that they receive just now, and that would be posts that are within the sort of estates establishment where they do work out with just now. Okay.
Okay, thanks for that confirmation. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'd be happy to agree the report.
Agreed.
Okay. That brings us to the end of today's executive. I thank everybody for their time this morning, and I think we've made it just before 1 o'clock, which allows Councillor Boyce not to get a surcharge on his charging vehicle, and folks to get on to whatever they're doing this afternoon. But thanks very much for this morning.
Thanks, Convener.
Thank you.